If you follow property headlines at the moment, you would be forgiven for thinking the UK housing market is doing several completely opposite things at the same time. House prices are rising, but affordability is still tight. Buyers are said to be returning, but transactions remain subdued. Confidence is improving, apparently. So, what's actually going on here, and why does it feel like the story changes depending on which headline you read? I'm Georgia from Property B. Let's jump into it. The simplest way to describe the current UK property market mood is cautious, but less frozen than it was. This isn't a boom, it isn't a crash. And despite what some headlines might suggest, it isn't a dramatic turning point either. What we're seeing instead is a market that's slowly starting to move again. After a long period of hesitation, over the past year or so, buyers largely stepped back. Higher mortgage rates, cost of living pressures, and general economic uncertainty made many people decide that waiting was the sensible option. Sellers, meanwhile, had to adjust to a reality where prices weren't rising automatically just because time was passing. Recently, that standoff has started to loosen, not disappear, just loosen. Buyer inquiries are up compared with last year. Viewings are happening more regularly, and transactions, while still below long-term averages, aren't grinding to a halt anymore. The key point here is this: activity's improving from a low base. That can feel like a surge if you compare it to the quietest point of the slowdown. But in historical terms, this is still a fairly measured market. In other words, the engine's running again, it's just not revving very hard. One of the most useful ways to understand what's happening right now is to separate buyer confidence from seller confidence, because they are not moving at the same speed. Buyers are becoming more confident, but in a very specific way. They are not suddenly feeling wealthy, they are not ignoring affordability, and they are certainly not throwing caution to the wind. What has changed is predictability. Mortgage rates, while still high compared with the ultra-low levels of the past, have become more stable. Buyers can now look at a mortgage quote and reasonably expect it not to be completely obsolete a week later. That stability matters more than headline rates themselves. It allows people to plan, and planning is usually the first step back into the market. Sellers, on the other hand, are split into two broad camps. Some sellers have fully accepted the current market. They price realistically, understand buyer sensitivity, and are prepared to negotiate. These properties tend to attract interest. Other sellers are still anchored to prices from a very different environment. They list optimistically, wait, reduce, relist, and then wonder why activity feels slow. This mismatch is one of the reasons the market feels confusing. Buyers are more active, but selective. Sellers are listing, but not always competitively. When those two mindsets align, transactions happen. When they do not, the listing just sits there, quietly aging. This brings us neatly to price movement, the part of the story that creates most of the contradictory headlines. On paper, average asking prices have risen in recent months. That part's true, but averages can be misleading. They're influenced heavily by the type of property coming to market, not just by what buyers are paying. If more higher value homes are listed in a given period, the average asking price rises, even if individual properties aren't selling for more than before. At the same time, completed sale prices tell a more restrained story. Growth's modest. In many areas, prices are broadly flat once inflation's taken into account. What we're seeing isn't widespread upward pressure, it's selective movement. Well-priced homes in areas with strong demand are selling, sometimes quickly. Poorly priced homes aren't, and they aren't being rescued by the market. This creates the impression that prices are rising and falling at the same time, because in different parts of the market they are. It's less a single market and more a collection of smaller ones, each behaving slightly differently. So why do the headlines feel so inconsistent? Part of the answer is that many of them are technically correct, but context light. A rise in asking prices can be true. Weak transaction volumes can also be true. Improved confidence can be real. Ongoing affordability pressure can exist at the same time. These things aren't mutually exclusive, even if they make for confusing reading. Another issue's timing. Property data moves slowly, but headlines don't. A small monthly shift can be framed as a major turning point, especially if it fits a wider narrative. The following month, a different data point takes center stage, and the story appears to reverse. The result's a sense of constant contradiction, when in reality, the market's just adjusting gradually to a new normal. If this feels unsatisfying, that's because gradual adjustments rarely make dramatic headlines. Unfortunately, the housing market's never been particularly concerned with narrative coherence. Taken together, what's really happening in the UK property market right now is fairly straightforward. Activity is improving, but from a subdued level. Buyers are returning cautiously, not enthusiastically. Sellers who price realistically are being rewarded. Those who do not are discovering that patience is not a pricing strategy. Prices are not collapsing, but nor are they accelerating in a way that suggests a return to the conditions of the past decade. It is a market that rewards preparation, realism, and flexibility, and quietly penalizes assumptions based on outdated conditions. So if the current market feels contradictory, that's because it's in a period of change rather than crisis or recovery. Over the coming months, attention will turn to mortgage rates, inflation data, and whether buyer confidence continues to stabilize. For now, the most accurate description's probably the least exciting one. The market's functioning again, just cautiously. If you've got a view on where things are heading, feel free to leave a comment. And if you find this kind of calm, data-led breakdown useful, subscribing helps more than you might think. New videos go up daily, covering what's happening in the UK property market and why it matters. I'm Georgia from Property Bee. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.